Hello everyone, this is Andrew. Welcome to Keen on America.
On July 4th, 2026, America will be 250 years old. An anniversary that will, no doubt, be greeted with a mixture of celebration, contemplation, and resignation. In Keen on America, Andrew talks not just about the American past and present, but also speculates on its future. What, Andrew asks, will be the 21st century fate of this now venerable American republic?
Hello everybody. The internet gets such a bad rap these days. It seems to be destroying everything, our culture, our politics, our happiness. So it's nice to read something more cheerful about the online world. And there was a very interesting op-ed recently in the Los Angeles Times by our guest today, Reza Aslan, on the religious revolution that's happening online. Aslan is a very distinguished writer, has many books, argues that the most important religious revolution of our time isn't happening in mosques or churches, it's happening online. Reza Aslan is also celebrating the 20th year anniversary of a book that came out, obviously, not this one, a book that came out in 2005 called No God But God, and there's a 20th anniversary edition out. And Reza is joining us from Highland Park in Los Angeles. So congratulations on all your accomplishments, Reza.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you. I must say it is a unique experience that I never thought I would have, a 20th anniversary edition of a book, let alone my first book. But it's nice to know that it's still in print and still selling enough. And actually, funny story, that when Random House wanted to do the 20th anniversary edition, they gave it to me and said, why don't you take a look at this? You probably haven't read it in 20 years. Anything that you want to update, we have a little bit of time for that update. And I ended up rewriting like a good third of this book.
Wow. Well, I know you got 4 kids. I'm an author too with kids. Do you treat your books like kids? Some do better than others. Some have other lives. I mean, the book that seems to have had the biggest impact of all is Zealot, The Life and Times of Jesus of Nazareth on Amazon. It has almost 12,000 mostly positive reviews. Do you treat each book in terms of its success or failure, or do you have less shall we say, quantifiable ways of thinking about books?
It's hard not to as a writer, as you know. I mean, I sometimes compare writing a book to birthing a child. I get it. I'm a man, but I've been through with my wife as she has done this 4 times, and
painful business, right?
It's painful business, yeah. And then then it goes out into the world, and then who knows, right? Who knows? I will say that usually, I think a lot of authors would probably admit this. There is a point, I would say, maybe about halfway, 3/4 of the way through finishing a book, where I think, maybe you're not willing to admit it to yourself, but this is a good one, or this one, not so much. Now, does that translate into success? No. The last book that I wrote, An American Martyr in Persia, I think I have this one right here, which is a biography of this missionary named Howard Baskerville, who went to Iran in 1907 to preach the gospel and ended up fighting and dying this heroic death in a democratic revolution, is, in my view, the best book I ever wrote. It's probably the worst selling book I ever wrote. So I don't know.
Yeah, I actually tend to agree. The favorite book, I'm not tooting my own horn, but my favorite book, Digital Vertigo, is my least successful. Not that any of them have been particularly successful. So yeah, I actually don't agree with you. I don't think you can ever tell whether or not a book is going to be any good. You get lucky one way or the other. So tell us about this first book. I want to come to your LA Times op-ed in a few minutes, but No God But God, small g, First G,
Yeah.
second G, big G. Your first book. Did you always want to be an author, Reza? I know you grew up in the Bay Area, and then you went down to Southern California. You're originally from Iran.
There was never ever a time when I wanted to be anything else other than an author. I mean, as a child of immigrants who, were forced to leave everything behind to come to the United States and scrape out a living, that was a hard argument to make to my mother. I joke about this all the time, where I told my mom that I wanted to be a writer, and she said, "Who's stopping you from writing? You go get a job and then you write." And I had to explain to her that no, I want my job to be writer. And she told me that's not a thing. That's not a real thing. So I knew I loved school and I loved learning, and I was particularly good at religion, which kind of brought all of my various interests in the humanities together: anthropology, sociology, music, philosophy, everything. I always tell students, if you can't decide between the humanities, choose religion, because it's all of them.
Yeah, maybe you like them too much. I know that you were at one point a convert to evangelical Christianity. Did you find every religion, or do you find every religion having some attractive qualities?
Most definitely. I became a convert before I became a scholar in high school. Growing up in Iran, we were, culturally Muslim. We weren't very close to our religion at all. But my father was a diehard communist and atheist. And so when we left Iran, he saw that as the opportunity to basically strip our lives of even the pretense of religion. So I didn't really grow up with any kind of religious edification, but I'd always been fascinated by religion. I mean, I really came of age watching with my own eyes the power that religion has to transform a society for good and for bad.
What year did you leave Iran?
79, like right in the heart of the revolution, the so-called Khomeiniist revolution, the misnomer.
If your father was a communist, I understand, of course, Khomeini was anything but a communist, but why did he leave?
My father, as I say, always had a healthy distrust of religion and religious people. And I think this is hard to remember because it's 40 years ago, but and the post-revolutionary propaganda about Iran has completely erased the reality. This was not an Islamic revolution by any means. It was a revolution that brought in, literally, according to sociologists, the largest popular revolution of the 20th century. It included Marxists and communists and feminists and intellectuals, people on the right, people on the left, the rich, the poor. Everyone joined this anti-imperialist revolution. It's just that when they got what they wanted, which is the Shah left, the only force that could fill the remaining vacuum, of course, was the religious organizations, and particularly Khomeini. And while most everyone gave Khomeini, a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, he was saying all the right things. My father, who never trusted anything anyone wearing a turban had to say on any topic, thought, let's get out of here just in case. And look, if it turns out the way Khomeini says it will turn out, we'll come back. So we each packed one luggage each and got the hell out on the last available plane. And it turned out that my father was correct. The dictatorship became a theocracy, and that was the end of my connection to my home country, unfortunately.
So what does that tell us about no God but God? How did you get from that to writing a rather, if not corrupt, cruel theocratic regime in Iran that drove your family and yourself out of your homeland, coming to the United States? How did you get from that and your flirtations with other religions, evangelical Christianity? I know you even sometimes imagined yourself as a Mexican. How did you get from that to no God but God?
Well, the Mexican thing is because I don't know if you remember the early 80s. This was at the height of the Iran hostage crisis, where Americans were being held in the American embassy in Tehran for 444 days. And as a 7-year-old Iranian who had just come to America, it was not the best time to go around telling people that you were Iranian. And so we were in a fairly lower class, Central California neighborhood. Everyone else was Mexican.
Yeah,
So I
you
just
were in Concord, in the East Bay. From
Yeah, it was actually we began in kind of the Fresno area and then moved into San Jose. That's right. But yeah, I just told everybody I was Mexican, and my name Reza sounds kind of Mexican. It's a Spanish word, and learned a little bit of Spanish. And the joke that I always give is that I thought telling people I'd be Mexican would make Americans a little less racist towards me. Turns out, no, not the case at all. It's just as much racism against Mexicans as it is against Iranians. And then anyway, so then, as you rightly say, the short version of this story is that when I was in high school, I went with some friends to an evangelical youth camp and heard the gospel story for the first time. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. And again, I'd kind of had this deep fascination with religion, but never really an opportunity to explore it in any meaningful way. And here I was given this promise that if I just believe in Jesus Christ, I'll never die and I'll have eternal life. It was a transformative moment for me. So I, in high school, converted to evangelical Christianity. And then when I went to college, and I began to study religion, it took about a week and a half for me to realize that everything I believed was wrong, or at the very least, not the full story. And so as I began to study religion more, I left Christianity. But at the same time, I also became really fascinated again with the religion of my forefathers and began to truly study that and focus a lot of my education on the religions of the Middle East, and particularly Islam. And then just to fast forward, so here I am, it's 2001. I am at the University of Iowa, simultaneously getting an MFA in creative writing from the Iowa Writers Workshop, but also teaching in the Department of Religion as quite literally the first full-time professor of Islamic and Middle Eastern studies in the history of the state. And the planes crash into the Twin Towers. And you can imagine everything at that point just shifted. My course, which had something like 25 people in it, my Introduction to Islam course, on September 10th had about 25 people on it. On September 12th, it had 250 people in it. And I found myself kind of at the forefront of the response of the state of Iowa, because it was literally nobody else while I was finishing my MFA. And then the way that this book came about, which is kind of a funny story, I got my MFA in fiction. I wrote a novel. That novel got me an agent. The agent was preparing to shop that novel around, and on a whim just asked, are there any other books, you're thinking about writing? And I said, well, yeah, there's a nonfiction book I'm thinking about writing. It's based on this enormously popular Introduction to Islam class I have. And I was thinking I'd like to write a popular book about Islam that kind of dispels some of the misinformation that's out there. And this was 2002, 2003. So she heard the word Islam and she heard nothing else. And so,
yeah. So, well, she's smart. Hey, sometimes agents can be a pain, but they're worth listening to. Often they say things you don't want to hear, but it's usually right. So
very true.
Is this book, if we're to boil it down a little bit, is it sort of a book collapsing the monotheisms?
No, I wouldn't say that at all.
Collapsing them in the sense of suggesting that there are roots and ideologies that connect all of them.
Well, that's just historical fact. I mean, it's a historical fact that Christianity and Islam, Christianity arose as a Jewish sectarian movement before it divorced itself wholly from its parent religion and became a Roman Hellenistic religion.
Yeah, which is one of the points, isn't it, in Zealot?
Precisely. And then Islam separated itself from both its parent religions, Christianity and Judaism, to become its own independent religion, but that these three religions all share a singular trunk. There's no question about that. They have an enormous amount in common. They tell the same myths, the same stories. They have the same fundamental beliefs. They worship literally the exact same God. Allah is the word for God. It is how even the ancient Arabs referred to Yahweh, the God of the Hebrew scriptures, the God that Jesus refers to as the Father. So in that sense, yes, obviously it is. But it wasn't so much that was the argument. The argument of the book fundamentally was fairly simple, which is that there's nothing all that unusual or extraordinary about Islam as a religion. That we have this idea that somehow the cultural and historical and contextual issues that have affected all great religions of the world and resulted in religions that are in constant state of evolutions, that are constantly malleable and adjusting themselves to the time in which they find themselves, the region in which they find themselves, the soils out of which they arrive, that's true for every religion in the world except Islam. That Islam is unchangeable, it's inflexible, it's not malleable, it's static. And it's even Muslims even say this kind of nonsense. And so what I wanted to write was an appealing history, a very accessible history that placed Islam in the context of the other great religions of the world, to show what is unique and interesting about it, but also what is very common about it, that it looks very familiar to.
What was the 20 years ago, the Wikipedia page for No God But God suggests that the book got a favorable response within the Muslim world. I wonder whether that was true also amongst the clerics of Tehran.
It is available in 2 different translations in Iran.
What was the general response, both within the Islamic and non-Islamic world, to the book?
It's a real good question. It was remarkable. Certainly the non-Islamic community was divided in half, right? There were those who, because of their political views, their ideas, saw it as this kind of whitewashing or some kind of apologetics, and dismissed it outright by the simple fact that it was written by a Muslim, albeit a Muslim who is an expert on the topic.
Albeit a Muslim who once became a Christian and
yes,
exactly. Himself as a Mexican.
That's even worse. But what I was really, really delighted by is how widely accepted it was in non-Muslim circles. It was written for non-Muslims. That's what it was written for. And that it's become the seminal text in every university, every college program, that the military to this day continues to read it, that all 4 military universities in the United States have it as required text, that it's a required, I don't know, right now I don't know if it is, but that it was a required text at the State Department, that anyone, who with a post in a Muslim majority country had to read this book. I mean, it was really remarkable how quickly it just became the go-to text for non-Muslims who wanted to understand what Islam actually was, how it arose, how to understand its multiple faces. What was really unexpected but delightful is the way that Muslims adopted it, particularly young Muslims, or Muslims that sometimes are referred to as the 9/11 generation, right? These young Muslims who, particularly in Europe and in North America, who felt as though they didn't understand their religion, that their religion was being defined for them either by their 80-year-old cleric, who doesn't have any sense of their needs or the world that they live in, or by these anti-Muslim zealots, this sort of propaganda that was everywhere in the media. And I think this book came at the right time for them, because what they needed was someone to say, that's not what you believe. That's not what your forefathers believed. That's not what the Prophet Muhammad said or did. And while the book itself doesn't pull any punches about Islam, it presents it in an objective way that, and to my delight, suddenly became a kind of manifesto.
So there's 2 ways these times.
Yeah.
I'm guessing Reza, two ways these books make their argument, either in terms of normalizing, so to speak, as you suggested, Islam. You suggest, yeah, Islam was cruel, but it was no crueler than Christianity, the Crusades, blah, 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 the Reformation, the Counter-Reformation. Is that an argument you made, that you're not glossing over the violence, the intolerance of Islam? You're simply suggesting it's no worse, no better than the other monotheisms?
I wouldn't say it's no worse or no better, because those are value judgments, and we're taught.
Well, I think most of us would agree that, mass murdering people who aren't part of your own religion is a bad thing.
Yes, but what I mean to say is that it's no different, right? There's nothing different about Islam and the way that it interacts with the secular world, and the way that it comes in hundreds of different flavors, and the way that it splits according to political needs. The book does constantly pull other religious traditions, Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism, Zoroastrianism, and it's a constant reminder to people to say that, like, look, what you're reading here, yes, it's unique to Islam, but every religion in the world, every religion in the history of the world has these exact same ups and downs and movements and conflicts. They are all pretty much moving along the exact same timeline. And, that's kind of, when you study world religions, that's the first thing that you discover, is the kinds of, we call it the patterns of religious phenomena that exist in all great religions.
Is there also a geopolitical or a geohistorical element to this, given the 1,500-year war between Islam and Christianity? At one point, the Ottoman Turks took Budapest, were at the gates of Vienna, conquered much of southern Spain, dominant technologically, intellectually. So there's a special element here, given Western history and given the historical conflict between Islam and Christianity, and of course the Crusades.
Not just the Crusades, the Shaiva kingdoms in India, the Buddhist monarchies, the religion, I think we need to recognize from the start, is far more than just a matter of beliefs and practices. Like, we think that religion is about the things that you believe and then the things that you do to express that belief. And obviously those things are important, but that's not what religion encompasses. When someone says, I'm a Muslim, I'm a Jew, I'm a Christian, I'm a Buddhist, I'm a Hindu, whatever, they're not making a faith statement. They're making an identity statement. And as a statement of identity, it's wrapped up in all the other markers of your identity, be it your politics, your economic viewpoint, your sexual orientation, your gender, your socioeconomic status. All of those things are tied to the statement, I am Christian. And they absolutely affect each other. They're inseparable in many ways. And I think,
so in a way, you're suggesting that Islam or any other religion, monotheistic or otherwise, is kind of like a nationalism?
It's kind of like a what?
A nationalism?
Well, it's nationalism.
It's a form of identity.
If you mean as a form of identity, absolutely. In the same way that nationalism is a form of identity, in which ethnicity is a form of identity, in which race is a form of identity, religion is also a form of identity. My argument is that religion, as a form of identity, is inextricable from those other forms of identity. So what a white middle class American calls Christianity bears almost no semblance whatsoever to what an impoverished coffee picker in Guatemala calls Christianity. Those religions barely have anything in common with each other. Even the way that they think about Jesus and who Jesus was, even the very notion of how they understand God is vastly different. Why? Is it because they're two different Christianities? No, because it's two different people, two different sets of identities. And religion can't be extricated Religion does not exist in a vacuum. There is literally no such thing as religion outside of culture.
So
It doesn't exist.
I take the point, Reza, but many critics of religion, I'm thinking of from Marx to Christopher Hitchens' excellent book, God is Not Great, very different from yours, and it'd be interesting. I don't know if you ever had the opportunity to debate him. It would have been an interesting conversation.
I knew Chris very well until he passed away.
They would say, I don't want to speak on behalf of Hitchens, he speak for himself, or was able to speak for himself. Why not just drop all the God stuff? I mean, all the stuff on culture and identity and class and gender and justice and blah, 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 that's all fine. But as Marx famously said, religion is the opium of the people. Give it up and focus on the real stuff.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Well, what Hitchens would say, and I think this is important because, you know, sometimes his views get adopted by other people. Hitchens was not an atheist. He said very clearly, I'm not an atheist. An atheist believes there is no such thing as God. I'm an anti-theist. I am against the very idea of a God. I am against the existence of religion. I am against the role of religion in public life. I believe that religion needs to be forcibly, if necessary, excised from human cultures, human society. And that's a whole separate view than what we're talking about here. But what, insofar as the notion of, say, Marx, which is, okay, religion provides social identity, it provides, you know, cultural touchstones, etc. Why bring God into it? And that's a very complicated question. I actually wrote an entire book about this called God, A Human History. And the shortest, fastest, simplest way to say what this
that also did very well. Is that one of your children?
That's
got,
right.
Almost you know, got over 1,000 views on 1,000 reviews on Amazon.
Yeah. The question about God is this: what do you mean by God? The word God is incredible to me. It is probably the most used word, maybe, you know, as far as concepts go, and yet it is the word that has the most variable meanings possible. Three people can say the word God in a room, and all three mean radically different things, and yet everyone assumes we're all talking about the same thing because you said God, so you trigger what I think God is. And so that's why, you know, this question of do you believe in God or not is a ridiculous.
But I mean, you're dodging the question a bit. I mean, that's a semantic question. People can use it any word they want. You wrote an interesting op-ed in the New York Times earlier this year on myth being the message. It's as always with your stuff, it's very intelligent, and you associate this myth as the message with religion. But if that's the case, and I don't necessarily disagree, then why introduce the G word? Why not just have the M word?
So let me explain. So it turns out, and this is what the sort of God book did, is I went and I was interested in the origins of the idea. Where did the very concept of God arise in human history, and why? And usually when this question is asked, certainly for the last 200 years, we look to sociology, we look through anthropology, we look to archaeology. We dig things up. Those things look like they are religious in some way. We date them and we try to interpret them. But the new science of religion is all about searching for God in our cognitive processes. We even call it the cognitive study of religion. That those of us looking for questions of origins aren't going to find those questions by digging things up and analyzing them. We're going to find them in the workings of our own brain. And while this is a fairly new movement in science, it has already created this extraordinary paradigm shift in the way that we think about the idea of God. And to put it again in the simplest podcasty way I can, what we know is that what we call this belief, this idea, this impulse towards religious thinking is part of our evolutionary process. It is the proper functioning of our brain. Now, what we don't know is why. And there are all kinds of really fascinating hypotheses about the why. It might be an accident. It might be an echo of some other evolutionary process.
But it could, of course, and
valuable.
I believe some people might argue that it's a plant. It's designed as a test, perhaps, some sort of biblical prophecy.
Some people say, because that's how our brains were made. They were
right,
made
and of course, again, not speaking on behalf of Hitchens, but he, or certainly Marx, would argue it's just a form of false consciousness.
Or it's, as Freud would say, an illusion. An illusion. Now, again, all of those things may be true, but what is...
But it is persistent. I mean, I think whatever one thinks about it is remarkably persistent.
What is persistent and undeniable is that it is the proper functioning of our brains to have this religious impulse for whatever reason. So talking about, well, why bring God into it is a very difficult question, because you're talking about how our brains function. So either our brains are feeding us an illusion or a lie, or it's just some vestige of an unusable part of our early evolution, like, you know, whatever, like the gallbladder or something like that, or it's part of being human, and it should be explored like any other part of being human.
Although, if you're making this part of the sort of cognitive revolution, aren't you, shall we say, secularizing God?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I get that a lot. My answer is this. Every experience you have ever had, without exception, is the result of chemical reactions in your brain. So why wouldn't faith also be the result of chemical reactions in your brain? Knowing the mechanics whereby the religious impulse is experienced doesn't make that impulse any more or less real, any more than, say, knowing the mechanics of how love is experienced doesn't make love any less real, or the beloved any less valuable.
Although you are sort of in danger of making it a little anthropocentric. I mean, it is possible to argue, lots of people have done, historically at least, that with simply whatever the size or nature of our brains, we're simply, if there is a God, we're irrelevant. We're in a minor side of the universe, and probably in a series, billions probably, of universes. And if there is a God, we're not even a footnote to a footnote to a footnote, let alone our brains.
I think that's as a valid existential view of the facts that I described, as is, maybe it's because we're God.
What do you mean, we're God? You mean you and I and everybody else listening and watching this?
I mean everything. So at the heart of Islam, and what drew me to it, and which is sort of the core of a particular sect in Islam called Sufi Islam, I read a lot about this, both in God, but also in No God But God, is the notion that if you are to accept God as creator, which is, the fairly, first task, right? First definition of God. What is God? If there is a God, well, God is creator. Then the theory that Muslims have, which is God is indivisible, God is one, that Judaism believes this as well, means that nothing can be created that isn't also the creator. If God is creator, then the only thing that he can create from is his creation, his substance as creation. And if that's true, then that means all things share in that same substance. By the way, this isn't a religious argument. Spinoza said the exact same thing.
Right. And aren't you, as a maybe Iranian or Persian, sort of reintroducing pantheistic and Zoroastrian ideas into
More
a religion that
pantheistic.
has been continually divided between that kind of pantheism and a
Yeah.
more and a narrower, perhaps more sectarian view of religion.
Well, Zoroastrian is more dualistic, but yes, this is pantheism. This is the concept of pantheism.
But
That
that's
all
not
things,
Islam, Reza, is it?
it is Sufi Islam. Yes, it is. Yeah, all things
So
are
you're
God.
claiming
God is all
Islam
things.
is a kind of Sufistic, pantheistic religion.
Well, again, Sufism as the mystical movement within Islam, all religions have a mystical movement in it, whether it's Kabbalah or whether it's,
Right.
Christian monasticism or, whatever the case may be. And the mystical movement in Islam is predicated on the idea of Tawheed, oneness, this idea of pantheism that I was just describing. But the notion of Tawheed, of oneness, is the core of what Islam believes. Sufis say, hey, everybody believes this. We just take it seriously. By the way, again, going back to the God book, what we can say with some measure of consistency when it comes to the earliest expression of the religious impulse that I was describing was pantheism. Pantheism isn't a new idea. It's the first idea.
Yeah, well, it was the idea before the idea.
It was the idea before the idea. That's even better. Well put. Yeah. Before there were any such things as gods, who looked like us or acted like us or who, shared our loves and dislikes and all of that stuff. What God meant was the creative force that infuse all beings, all things. That is the first spirituality. So we pantheists like to say we're the OG religion.
But implicitly, at least in a way, in this book and in some of your work, you're calling for a kind of pantheism for Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, Jews to give up their own particular sectarian beliefs and unite.
I wouldn't say give up. I would
liberate themselves.
I would say recognize that what you call religion is an external shell that must be broken in order to get to the heart of the thing. That religion, as Sufis say, is a signpost. It points the way to God. But you don't want the signpost. Right? The signpost is useful. Use the signpost by all means. Sufis say, think about the world's religions as different paths up a mountain heading to the summit, which is where God is. Every path will eventually get there. So just pick one.
I'm not sure everyone agreed that every path would get there. A couple of years ago, we had Ayan Hirsi Ali on the show, another skeptic of religion, I'm sure you're all too familiar with, who argues that there is, amongst her arguments seem to be that Islam by definition is anti-female. What do you make of her?
But do you see where I see that? This is exactly how we started this. That, yeah, some religions, all religions in the world are patriarchal. All religions in the world have, anti-female aspects to it, scripturally, theologically, legally speaking. But Islam is unique. Islam is different because it has nothing else but that.
Well, I'm not sure. Does she say that? Is that what she says?
Listen, I know Ayan better than you do. That is her argument, that Islam is different. She has actually said Islam is not a religion. She has said those exact words. So it's that kind of rhetoric that is absurd, particularly for scholars. She's not a scholar. She's not an expert on religion. She just was a Muslim who stopped being a Muslim and then became this kind of critic of Islam. And good for her. She's done some actually remarkable work when it comes to activism for women's rights, particularly in Somalia, which is where she her background is from. But she doesn't know jack squat about religion, and it's very easy to look to her own religious experience and say, it was awful, therefore I'm going to extrapolate from my individual experience and make generalized comments about 2 billion people and what they believe, but I will not accept that in the same way that 2 billion Christians might have radically different views, some progressive, some conservative, some profoundly misogynistic, some profoundly feminist, but not Islam. Not Islam. Islam only gets to be one thing, the thing that I imagine it to be. It's frankly stupid and not really deserving of any kind of real intellectual rigor when it comes to responding to it.
What are your politics as, shall we say, a Sufist or a more of a monotheistic Muslim writer? You recently, I know, appeared on a panel with, I was rather surprised with this, Tucker Carlson and Steve Bannon. Last year, you wrote a book, a kid's book about Israel and Palestine, designed for kids 6 or 7 years old. Do you have a politics? Has this shaped your politics, or is that the wrong question?
Well, no, I mean, it's not a wrong question. It's just not a relevant question. But I'm not in any way shy about my politics. I am a proud progressive. I am a diehard liberal. I think that, the Democratic Party is too mainstream for my taste. I believe that all human beings are worthy of dignity for the simple fact that they're human beings. I accept everyone's own sense of identity, who they say they are, and I have no business telling them who they aren't. And I'm proactively against the fascist conservative movement that has absolutely hijacked this country. So that's not I'm openly about that. But when I write about religion, yeah, of course, the notion that all people deserve human dignity, that they should be able to tell their own story, and we should probably take their own word for what they believe and what they think. I take that seriously as a scholar. I believe that that is an important part of my research and my gathering of data in order to make conclusions about movements, social movements, religious movements that first and foremost reflect the true diversity and eclecticism that these movements, which, as I say,
so to come back to
millions of people.
Yeah, I don't want to keep on coming back to this, but as an outspoken or self-described outspoken progressive, is there nothing in you that makes you in some way, I mean, even if she might be a slightly questionable character, Ali's defense of female rights, you're not in any way sympathetic to that?
I just like literally said she should be commended for the work that she has done on female rights, particularly in Somalia. Those actions are very, very important. My criticism is that those actions come from a place of profound ignorance and unapologetic bigotry. Ayaan Hirsi Ali has publicly said that all Muslims should be forced to become Christians. That is a literal thing that she said. So you can't ignore that and then move on to say, well, but she's done some really great things for,
I take your point. So we still need to come back to online religion and all that. So very briefly, you wrote this book last year on Israel, Palestine. Are you concerned, Reza, given the current situation in the Middle East, are you concerned with the level of intolerance on both sides when it comes not just to the Israel, Palestine, Gaza issue, but the Judaism, Islamic baggage that this conflict inevitably brings with it?
No question. I mean, it's partly why I wrote the book. I've been writing about Israel, Palestine for 20 years. I've made half a dozen trips there. In that time, I did a TV show in there. Most of my books have been published in Hebrew. This is a conversation and a controversy that I have been thoroughly engaged in for, as I say, 2 decades, and I have no hope. I have zero hope of any kind of lasting agreement that would result in anything even approaching a two-state solution. But that's not why I wrote the book. I wrote the book not to give a way out of this mess. I wrote the book because, as you rightly say, the problem with this conflict is that you have two dueling national narratives that are competing with each other. And that so often, merely the acceptance of one of those national narratives necessarily requires the denial of the other one. And what I wanted to do was say, is there a way to just simply present both of these national narratives in parallel with each other, not beat around the bushes about the way that each have done very, very terrible things, each have done very wrong actions, throughout this time. Don't ignore that. But instead of playing the blame game, just present both of those national narratives. Because the one thing that children have the ability to do that adults do not have is to hold two seemingly competing, seemingly conflicting, and even contradictory viewpoints together. They have the ability to say both could be right in a way that the adult brain, ossified as it is, simply doesn't. And all I wanted to do with this book is to tell that 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 8-year-old, hey, if you can just simply see both sides of this, you don't need to figure out how to fix it. Just if you can see what both sides are doing and why, then you have a superpower. It's called empathy. And that empathy is the first step to making you the kind of peacemaker who could perhaps one day be the one to help us settle this problem, because your parents have done nothing but screw it up.
Yeah, I wonder, maybe they should send you there then. Have you ever been asked?
I've spoken on behalf of both the Israeli government and the US government and a number of institutions, both private and public, numerous times in Israel. The last time was, I think, 2 years ago, or yes, 2 years ago, right before the October 7th attack, actually. Yeah, I mean, look, one thing I can tell you, I'm not the first person to say this, is that the politics of this argument in Israel have been so calcified, it's very difficult to draw the other side out of their particular viewpoints. We are really in an intractable.
Yeah, and we were in an intractable position before. I don't know we need a new word for intractability. Let's end on a more cheerful note, at least from your point of view.
Yes.
Religious revolution is happening online. This fascinating piece you wrote in the LA Times. I'm guessing you might even turn it into a book. How the internet is saving religion, perhaps something like that. You argue that the most important religious revolution of our time isn't happening in mosques or churches. It's happening on our screens. It's a consequence of COVID and how more and more dependent we've become on our screens. What's happening on our screens, and why is this so important for religion, particularly Islam?
It's funny you say that, because I mentioned that I rewrote about a third of this book. I have a whole chapter now on the book just about precisely this notion, the online revolution.
And this is the 20th anniversary.
The 20th anniversary,
God,
the re-release, the notion of the cyber ummah, right? I mean, look, I think first of all, it's important to note that on a sociological level, what the internet has done, what internet and social media has done, is it has profoundly redefined the very notion of community. Think about it this way. Our species has existed for approximately 200, maybe 250,000 years, although that number keeps expanding. But let's just call it 250,000 years. In those 250,000 years, the definition of community was the people around you, whether it's the people in your cave or in your hut or in your village or in your city or in your town or in your empire or in your nation. The definition of community is geographically bound until about 2 decades ago, when suddenly because of the internet, because of social media, the very concept of community changed for the first time in human history, so that now a kid in Jakarta, a Muslim kid in Jakarta who loves, heavy metal, has more in common with a Muslim kid in Detroit who also loves heavy metal than either of those two kids have in common with literally anyone around them. And so they are forming their primary collective identity, not according to the usual community, but in a virtual community. And that is transforming religion. Yes, it's creating a lot more sects and schisms and breakoffs. That's kind of what religion does, right? It's just it's meant for that. And so there is a lot of fracturing of religion online, but within that fracturing are new experimentations, new way of thinking about religion. LGBTQ Catholics, which are a huge community online. The so-called Quranists, these are Muslims who refuse any other source of authority in Islam except the Quran. And there's nowhere for them to actually physically create these communities, so they exist online, and it is a massive online community. All of this is to say, and also, if that weren't enough, it's destroying traditional authorities. So that Muslim in Jakarta, if he had a question about Islam, the only option that he ever had was to go to his local mosque and ask his imam, hey, should I drink Coke or Pepsi? And then the imam would say, drink Coke, not Pepsi. Coke is good, Pepsi evil. And that would be the sole information that he would have. Nowadays, that Muslim in Jakarta doesn't even have to leave his house. He can go to fatwaonline.net, where there are 500,000 ready-made fatwas. He could just search Coke versus Pepsi.
Are there any fatwas on Coke or Pepsi?
The joke is there's a fatwa on literally everything. And the best part is, if you don't find your fatwa, they actually have a cyber mufti that you can just ask the fatwa to.
Wow.
And you'll get a ready-made fatwa.
Well, I have to say, I'm a big Diet Coke person. So if I can find a religion that makes drinking Diet Coke,
that's yours.
They guarantee some sort of afterlife, then I think I'll do that.
Look, we don't know what this is going to do to religion,
but no, I take your point, Reza. But in all seriousness, I've obviously made a rather silly joke, but is this going to result in all religions becoming more and more absurd, where people literally do go online and find some fatwa about whether or not you can drink Diet Coke and say, okay, I'm a Diet Coke Muslim, or I'm a Diet Coke Jew?
You mean more absurd than we broke off from that group because they have their service at 6 p.m. on Friday, but we have our service at 12 p.m. on Saturday. I mean, look, I'm somebody who has studied religions all my life. Religions are absurd. Why are they absurd? Because they are man-made institutions. And I mean literally man-made, as in...
So does that make us absurd? I got my title, by the way, for this conversation. Yeah. Religions are absurd, according to religious experts.
Because they're man-made institutions, and we are absurd. We are petty. We are prone to in-groups and out-groups. We are violent. And so the institutions that we create, be they religious or not, will be petty and violent and prone to, all kinds of sects and schisms. What's, I think, remarkable, though, is that once you have a global community, and that's what you have online, really, you have the ability to create these micro communities that are all about post-materialist values. They're not about security or sustenance or shelter. They're about other things. They're about the things that make us human, that draw us to each other. And that's really what religion has always been. It's always been a language that has allowed people who share similar ideas, similar values, to speak to each other through myth and metaphor about the ineffable experience of being human. That's fundamentally what religion provides. And what better place to provide it than online?
Well, that's a wonderful conclusion and introduction to Reza Aslan's 20th anniversary version of No God But God, his first book, one of his more successful books, but not certainly his only book. Reza, congratulations on this. And one thing I can guarantee is that the debate about religion won't go away. So I would like to have you and Hitchens on the show. We can't get him. We'll have to find somebody else.
We can have a seance. We can have a seance, and we'll get Hitchens on.